Welcome to Fluency Jams, where your hosts, Steve and Aaron, gather notes from the real world of business and tech. We're talking with leaders and innovators who are making a difference, searching for stories that inspire, challenge, and educate. You're about to enter a dimension, not only of ideas, but of innovation, a journey where no podcast has gone before. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to introduce my co-host, Steve Taylor, who also happens to be the co-founder of Fluency Digital. Steve, if you want to talk a little bit about your background, maybe we can pull in our guest today.
Thank you, Aaron. Aaron is the VP of Business Development for Bring Me the News. And we're super excited for today's conversation as we have Dan Wick here from Omnia Fishing. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dan a number of years ago when he was VP of Technology at RedStamp. He's now the co-founder and CTO of Omnia Fishing, where they're bridging the gap between e-commerce and angling. With past roles including VP of Technology and CTO at RedStamp, Dan brings a wealth of knowledge in mobile and web development, API architecture, and product innovation. Super thrilled to have him on the show. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, guys. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Dan, how did you get into the fishing technology space? I guess that's a question we both had.
Sure. Yeah, it may seem like an unusual combination. I think hopefully over this conversation, it becomes a little more obvious that those two things go together. But yeah, I grew up in rural Northwest Iowa near Okoboji, for anyone familiar with that part of the state. A pretty big hotbed of recreation and fishing. My whole family fished growing up. My grandparents, my parents, my mom, my dad, brother, everybody fished. So we fished every weekend. So I grew up fishing casually from shore, taking some fishing trips and things. So I definitely was aware of fishing as a kid and as a young adult. Been a latent angler as an adult, but by the time Omni came around, I found my passion back for fishing. And so I definitely had a background in understanding the sport and the hobby, sort of like how commerce and technology could come into play. My whole career has been in technology. I started designing and creating websites in college at Luther College. That was back when the web was just starting, so it was kind of the Wild West. Everybody that knew how to write HTML had a competitive advantage. Websites turned into data-driven websites, and data-driven websites turned into e-commerce. And so just kind of rode that wave and really focused on specializing e-commerce and consumer. Like you mentioned in RedStamp, that was sort of my last company. We were acquired in 2013 by Taylor Corporation from North Mankato. For the 8 years leading up to that, worked with Erin Newkirk, my co-founder, who was also at Caribou now as Chief Marketing Officer. And then her co-founder, Renee Walter, was there before me. Aaron and I took RedStamp to its final phase as a native mobile app. And again, right place, right time there with the iPhone just coming out. And we created an iPhone app that really took off. And that was my first experience with really hitting that point of inflection in technology. And so that really amplified the ability for us to reach our customers. And so that was a pretty awesome experience in learning a new frontier and native mobile, the convergence of consumer card giving and technology. That was amazing. We were acquired in 2013. I was operating within Taylor Corporation, running RedStamp, working on some API projects for them. And then my two co-founders here at Omnia, Matt Johnson and Chris Morgul, came from the fishing industry. We started talking in, I would say, been 7 or so years ago. So summer of 2018, we started kicking around this idea, and then we started in earnest working on it in 2018 and went to market in early 19. And here we are today with the product you see.
Yeah, that's amazing. What's really fascinating to me is your vision for combining technology, e-commerce, with the idea of fishing. Fishing goes back as far as history. People have been fishing forever, and to combine that, to use, kind of your background in technology and e-commerce. I mean, how did you both of them together? What was the genesis of that?
Thinking about things I'm excited to work on and build upon, look for things that have a deep vertical market and are sometimes fragmented, and that definitely is fishing retail. I think anyone that's ever tried to find fishing tackle, there's lots of places to go get it, but it's really fragmented and hard to do. And online, it's been very latent to move into e-commerce. So that was appealing to me. The idea for Omnia, when Matt and Chris were coming up with it, it was really about, could we create a unique shopping experience for every lake? And so this idea of taking a sport like fishing and then having a large pool of data, databases of water bodies and lakes that have structured data about the water temperature and the water clarity, and then combining that with structured data of products, of a product catalog in e-commerce, which is what I knew really well, that had different attributes like bait lengths and widths and colors and sizes, really was an interesting thing. And then this idea of adding in user-generated content to the fishing reports where people could give us structured data on how they caught what they caught it was pretty clear to us that there was a chance for us to create a flywheel where we could sort of change the fishing industry and build geospatial experiences that sort of visualize the technology, but also let people participate in the shopping cycle and the learning cycle in a way that was unprecedented at the time.
Yeah, that's great. What's really fascinating is the fact that you provide fishing reports for specific lakes, and there's so many lakes. It's kind of infinite. So where's the repository for that information? And how many lakes do you provide? Yeah,
we live in the state of 10,000 lakes, which I realize not everyone in the country knows us for that, but it's pretty clear that we live in sort of the mecca. Walk out your front door, go a few steps, and it's hard to not run into a place where you could fish. So I think sometimes we take that for granted, what a unique opportunity and kind of special thing that is. One of the first exercises that Chris, Matt, and I did as we started the business was we knew that we needed to have this normalized set of data that was representative of all the fishing bodies of water in the United States, which was a lot. So we didn't want to touch salt water. We just wanted to stay inland. There's a lot of fragmented data in terms of DNRs and state and local organizations. One of the first things we did was consolidate a bunch of those things. So we came up with north of 100,000 representative bodies of water, but there really was about 20,000 lakes and streams and rivers and reservoirs that made sense. So that was the first data set we created. And then there's a lot of really good attribute data about like temperature and clarity of the water. So we normalized that and made that into a really big database. And that was the first thing we did before we then started working on how you would submit information about that. And then also creating the product catalog to have some sort of commerce side to that too. But we really started with like, okay, what's the surface area of the lakes that we wanted to identify? And we kind of landed on 20,000 key ones.
Yeah, then I imagine you map the products to the lakes, right? Because there's specific products that are more, I guess, conducive or work better with certain bodies of water. Right?
Yeah, and to do that at scale, we really did it more of like a structured data way in terms of like we didn't map it to specific bodies of water. We mapped the product attributes, the size, the color, the length, the weight to attributes of water. So this body of water is stained water where it's harder to see. So you recommend something that's a brighter color, time of year, species you're fishing for. We took that as a rules-based engine where we created the mapping of the products to attributes, and then the attributes then match to the lake, and then you create sort of more scalable. So that really served us well in the early days of taking the time to think through that. It was handcrafted, but it wasn't so handcrafted that it was just picking products for lakes. It was picking products for attributes. Then as our product catalog grew from, in the early days, it was 1,000 SKUs. So now we have 35,000 SKUs. That scaled really nicely because we came up with a rules engine that set those early days.
So it's not as much about which lake it is, it's the attributes that they share, right?
And then the user experience kind of centers on the lake that they're actually fishing at. And then,
yeah, we like to say, if you can tell us where you're going to fish, what you're going to fish for, and when, we can do a pretty good job of using the algorithm to recommend different things. It's not just about shoving product in your face, but that is an important part of the fishing journey. You need the gear to fish. But it was more about like how to fish, the techniques. So there was like a catalog of techniques that we thought were important, identifying what actual seasons made sense, dividing the country into 3 regions in terms of seasonality. Not everyone has ice fishing like we do here. There was a lot of coming up with things that made sense to a group, but then not having to. We always wanted to do this at a larger scale. So we made sure that as we were architecting the system, it matched up with things that as new things came into our view that we could adapt them really quickly. Like we originally started with specializing in just bass, smallmouth and largemouth, but then quickly we expanded into multi-species like crappie and walleye. The initial work we built to map everything held when we expanded. So that was a good first kind of test on kicking the tires to say like, how big could this engine be? And I think it's served us really well. So 5 years later, it's still working pretty well.
and now when you talk about scalability, you kind of embarked on a product transformation, taking something tactile like fishing and really building a digital product around it. You've scaled really well. If there's anything you'd do differently, what were some of the technical challenges you faced? So,
yeah, I think it was difficult at the beginning to get our arms around the size of the data set we needed. We knew we needed to have awareness of what we called pins per lakes. When you're going state by state, looking through PDFs and CSV files to get this data, normalization was a big hurdle, but I think a necessary hurdle. I think it was a good lesson to learn is if you're going to try to do something unprecedented, you have to start with things that maybe don't seem scalable. But getting this data set right was a big lift and important. But I don't know if there was a way that we would have been able to do it differently other than us starting with a much smaller scale. So I think that's one thing that maybe we could have done is just started with a region, a state, done it less broadly. But I think because we knew that we were starting with e-commerce as the piece, we wanted to make sure that we could reach a broad audience. Obviously, one of the benefits of e-commerce is you can reach nationwide, if not global. We focused just on United States and Canada. So I think that being less ambitious on how much coverage we want could have been something we could have done. Fast forwarding now to some of the geospatial mapping stuff we do, I think one of the most challenging things was we knew that we wanted to do a better job with water temperature specifically and water clarity. And the only way to do that is to either to find that data. It doesn't really exist in terms of like surface temperature for water, but we built proprietary pipelines from United States government satellites to pull down data more visual, and then writing our own models and training things to infer what the actual temperature would be. So I think that was a very ambitious thing that we added on recently in the last year that really set us apart, saying we don't have to predict or guess water temperatures, we can actually tell you based on data. So those two things, the scale and scope of doing that, were pretty ambitious. Maybe starting more like crawl, walk, run before we got into like, let's just do the whole continental United States.
Right, that's a lot to bite off. And now you've all served that up in kind of a mobile app. Kind of curious how that's going.
So we started as a web-based first company, which strategically was smart for us in terms of finding distribution and finding the market, being accessible to everybody. That was our choice. We knew we wanted to build a library of expertise that wasn't just on commerce. So like obviously the SEO benefits are great. People asking questions in places that aren't on your property was important to harness. So I think that tipped the scales by far to do the web first. We built things in more of an API-driven way, so things were transferable, so to speak, knowing that we didn't want to build ourselves out of moving into other clients in the future. As you can probably imagine, when you're on the water, or on your way to the water, or just in your daily life, having your phone there, that the convergence of location awareness, having a camera in your pocket, and the ability to pull things up, it became a need. The mobile web serves us well. We still optimize it for mobile web. It does a great job, but certain things needed to be closer to bare metal that we needed to do natively. And I think distribution in the App Store, after we had spent 2 or 3 years building the brand, we knew that we could use Omnia as the brand's foothold in the App Store, still servicing people for commerce, but then that was a chance for us to then say the app's flagship experience is really more map-based. And so I think leading with the map, that was a chance for us to go to market in a way that was maybe a bit different than just going about like, hey, here's the gear I need. It was more about like, okay, orient yourself on where you want to fish. And so that was an opportunity for us. That was really what we started doing about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, where we wanted to lead with encouraging people to use the app to file fishing reports. And then that led into building some pretty rich location-aware experiences using native mobile there.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. So there's user-generated information that's going into the app in that sense.
Yep.
You know what? Yeah, that's very interesting. It's also interesting. You talked about going to market. How did you go to market, and how did people find you? How did you initially get people to the site?
Yeah, well, my philosophy, I'm not necessarily a product person, but having been in technology and been around for a long time in the web, I've always believed that SEO is not necessarily a separate practice. It's more of a part of the product. So I felt pretty strongly, and Matt and Chris do too, about like, SEO was such a big opportunity for us, not gamifying our content to be friendly for SEO, but building a broad breadth of expertise around a subject matter. When you take the vector of location, it really allowed us to like that local SEO side of things with sort of the broader stuff was a really nice sweet spot for us. So we relied heavily, almost half of our traffic comes from SEO sources. We really didn't get into paid in any shape or form until a couple or 2 or 3 years into the business. We had a robust e-commerce system. We were still benefiting from people finding us through organic means. I think eventually we did layer in some paid stuff with, PLAs and paid ads. And then we expanded into creation on YouTube. And so I think there were some things there. And then obviously social became a thing. And so we've experimented with a lot of different paid things. But at the end of the day, the organic, authentic kind of search intent is what we like to harness. And so I would say overall SEO has been the hardest working kind of tool for us. But we do use, for driving downloads and trial starts for our subscription service, we definitely have relied on paid for that in some ways.
It sounds like you laid a really good foundation with the content and the SEO and architecture of the site, and then layered on later some paid elements. So that subscription model is kind of interesting.
So we've always had an element of subscription to our business, even when we were just known as a commerce company. So it's sort of like Amazon Prime and REI kind of combined. We called it Omnia Premium at the time. It gave everybody 10% back in store credit after every purchase, and then they had unlimited free shipping, no minimums. So that was always a compelling way for us to differentiate ourselves in the space, to say, we give you store credit back and we get it to you really fast. In these days of drop shipping and things coming from 4 or 5 different locations after you make a purchase can be frustrating. We really prided ourselves on staying close to the customer, having really good customer support. We answer the phone to this day.
Wow.
If you order before 1, you get your order out the door on the same day. And pretty much anywhere in the continental United States, you'll get it in 2 days. It's gotten really good. So we always have had some element of an add-on subscription model, but in building out sort of this recommendation engine, it became clear that we were building also sort of a byproduct that was really valuable geospatial data, and having a map-based sort of experience that we felt was getting to be good enough that it could be something that on its own that would be worth subscribing to. So we started about 18 months ago, probably a year in earnest, a new service called Pro. We called it Omnia Pro. And so that was where for $50 a year, you get those same transactional benefits of 10% back and free shipping. But then you also got these really advanced layers. I was talking about the first party data we have for water clarity and water temperature. And now we have those features available to Pro members who are on the web and in the app for $50 a year, 7-day trial. You can see kind of all that stuff in the app. And also we do depth contours. We license really rich weather data in terms of visualizing wind. So if you can imagine combining like wind data with water temperature data, that's a pretty valuable thing. Standing that up on both iOS and Android and on the web, we turned that into a pretty robust subscription business that in less than 6 months, we've got 11,000 subscribers. So it's going pretty well. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
That's great. So where do you see the future going with digital tools for angling?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like in the broader sense, there's always ebbs and flows. Is consumer and e-commerce, is there still more room for it to grow? COVID really gave people some false sense of like, this is the new normal in terms of growth and trajectory. I think we benefited in terms of like, fishing is inherently outside and not being able to go in store to get things accelerated our product market fit. But it also forced us to get really close to our customer, which is something that we've stayed close to the whole time. So I would say the future, it's continuing to stay close to the customer and service what they need. I think we've just started to scratch the surface on what we can give to people when it comes to mapping. Mapping is probably our flagship capability in terms of like layering more and more, not only like traditional things with weather and temperature, but also like in context of looking at lakes, being able to understand like this part of the lake has, sandbars, or this part of the lake has submerged vegetation and the different structures. So we never want to violate someone's privacy in terms of, hey, here's a spot where I caught fish. Everything's inherently private first. But if somebody did want to evangelize the lake and talk more about here's exactly where it's happening, here's the boat ramp that I used to do it. There's so many good intended and really nice people in the sport that they want more people to fish. And so giving them the ability to champion their lake and evangelize sort of like how and what you should be doing. And what's nice about that is like, just because there's more people coming to these bodies of waters, there's this wonderful sort of ethos of like leave no trace. So I think it's really a nice way for us to be a part of the community and not just be focused on commerce and subscription. It can be also about championing people's ability to understand and break down lakes.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And, this is kind of a personal question. I know you're a dog person. What kind of dog you have and whether you bring your dog fishing.
Yeah. So we have, it's funny, my business partner also has a golden retriever. So we have golden retrievers from the same dad from 2 different litters back home in Iowa. Dodge and Charlie make it to the office every day. A couple of our warehouse guys have other golden retrievers. It's not a requirement to have a golden retriever, but they definitely all come to work every day. I think bring your dog fishing. People do it, especially like with kayaking. I always admire people that have disciplined enough dogs to do that. My dog would be swimming the whole time or have a hook in her mouth. I don't know that I'd take her fishing, but I definitely take her to the water a lot. She goes to work. I mean, she punches in just like the rest of us.
That's awesome. Finally, what kind of advice do you have for founders or would-be founders looking to do what you're doing or innovate in a product space, either similar to fishing or other space?
Yeah, there's so much going on now with generative space, but I think this idea of being able to build, it's never been easier to build and learn how to build, and being able to build as an individual, I think that's the biggest kind of step change that's happened in the last, I would say, 6 months. If you have a growth mindset and believe you can learn anything, now is the golden age to do that. And many times, I remember when I learned Rails, it was 20 years ago, it was so awesome to get a local environment going and build something and be excited about it. But then there was like, how the heck do I get this to production and into the world? now those kind of questions are so easy to answer, and the resources to deploy are so easy. And so not only is the knowledge gap smaller, but the cost to do these things is lower than ever. This idea of raising money, getting validation from venture capitalists, investors, or the community, I think now is an easier, better time than ever for the right motivated person to learn a skill and show that you can solve a problem, and then layer on the additional people, whether it's doing it on the side or something that's more available and possible than ever. I would say building and showing versus talking. It's exciting to talk about ideas. I remember, back when apps were out, it was like, there's an app for that. And the number of people that over the years had asked you, like, you build apps, would this be a good app? Now I can say, if you have an idea for something, go build it.
Right.
And see what people think. You don't need 20 million people to use your products. I always say 1,000 true fans, but I would even say 100 true fans. That's what I would say, is there's never been a better time to be building, and there's less excuses than ever.
Absolutely. I agree with you. That's great advice and very inspiring too. It almost motivates me to go out there and start building. It's kind of funny how it's enabling, right? Even non-programmers can actually go in there and build a prototype. I really appreciate your time and you being on the show today. I think what you've shared with us is really some insights into what it takes to be a founder.
You bet.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Very impressive. Your site is amazing, and it was really great meeting you too. A lot of insights.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.